Welcome back to a numbers game with Ryan Girdusky. Happy post-election Thursday. We're taping this on Wednesday, so I got confused for a second, but happy post-election Thursday. It was a wave. There's no easy way to say it. It was a Democratic wave across the whole country. I was paying attention to local races in states that were not making the national news, in Kansas, in Connecticut, in Georgia, in red states and blue, and Democrats absolutely had a triumphant night. And there's, I think, multiple reasons for that. First, in states without heavy, high-profile elections like Pennsylvania, Georgia, Kansas, Republican turnout was pretty mild. Republican turnout was very low in some places, and it definitely hurt Republicans down ballot. I know for our school board campaign in Pennsylvania, we, for the very first time, had door knockers knocking on doors, and we paid them to go knock on doors. And the overwhelming response from Republicans was, "I didn't know there was an election happening." And you could tell by the way that the votes were coming out in Georgia, where Republicans lost a statewide election for the first time in 20 years by 20 points. It wasn't a high-profile position, but they did nonetheless lose it by a substantial margin in an election they weren't expected to. So the low turnout from non-high-profile states definitely hurt, definitely hit. With this great political realignment that has been happening, we are seeing college-educated whites, highest propensity voter. They're the ones who are shifting further to the left, and they showed up in big numbers, big numbers. The We No Kings rally, I almost said We Are the Kings rally, the No Kings rally, those groups of voters were showing up in droves, and I don't know in the average non-Virginia, non-New York City, New Jersey state, if there were Republicans even engaged at the same level. So I think that was a big part of it nationwide, was just the high propensity turnout, high interest election. The independent number, the number of independents showing up, was particularly low compared to their usual percentage. And many of them were probably Trump voters or non-committal Republicans, lower propensity people. Independents usually always vote at a lower propensity than Republicans and Democrats, but it was very, very low. So I think that's the overall country to begin with. Then when you look at high stakes states, I guess, states that the media was covering back and forth, like Virginia, New York City, and New Jersey, I think that there was two different things happen. So we'll start in Virginia. Winsome Sears was a bad candidate, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was hearing from people on other campaigns in Virginia how poorly she was running her operation, and it showed. She lost by the worst election results for a Republican in almost half a century. She just did terribly. She turned people off. But there was also the issue of the government shutdown, and that definitely affects people in Virginia. There was the issue of Trump's the incumbent president. Whenever you have the incumbent president being of one party, Virginia and New Jersey goes the other way. It's a knee-jerk reaction. That's part of the zeitgeist. So you have the government shutdown, you have a bad candidate on top of the ticket, and you have the Republican being in power in the White House. And all those things make up a perfect storm against Winsome Sears. Jason Miyares losing by, I think, 6 points. It was way larger than I thought it was, but it shows the intensity to which the anti-Republican sentiment was there. Remember, I said to everybody, if Winsome Sears loses by double digits, Jason Miyares is going to lose. She lost by 14 points. Had she lost by 8, Jason Miyares would have won. And so would a lot of other Republicans down ballot. When it comes to New Jersey, I was on Buck and Clay's show on Tuesday, and I was just telling them early numbers coming out of New Jersey, and the Democratic turnout was preposterously high. It was insanely high. I want you to think of this, that Jack Ciattarelli, the Republican nominee who ran in 2021, he got 122,000 more votes than he received in 2021, enough to win in a 2021 election, right? Had we done the 2021 election again, and Governor Murphy had the same amount of votes that he had gotten that year, but Jack Ciattarelli had gotten 2025 numbers, Ciattarelli would have beat Murphy. Ciattarelli had that much new voters. Remember, I said New Jersey had 160,000 new registered Republicans. But even though Jack Ciattarelli got 122,000 new voters, the Democrats, Mikey Sherrill, had over 400,000 new voters. They turned up out of the woodwork in remarkable numbers, right? Jack Ciattarelli got 1.255 million last time. He got 1.37 million this time. 1.37 million, big number. Murphy got 1.33 million last time. Mikey Sherrill got 1.79 million this time. Huge increase coming out of South Jersey of the average Democrat voter. Mikey Sherrill had so many Democrats vote for her that she was only 400,000 votes away from hitting Kamala Harris numbers. That's remarkable. And kudos to her campaign for running a good campaign. I mean, there's no shame in sitting there saying somebody of the opposite party ran a good campaign, but it also speaks to the environment of the year. That's part of it. And that's what I want people who feel deflated to realize. The year, sometimes there are just bad election cycles, right? Sometimes there are bad election years. There were, I have a friend who ran for office in New York in a Republican-leaning area who had a lot of money, campaign money, who had a ground game, who had an operation, who was really working hard for the seat. And the Democrat had no visible campaign whatsoever, was working out of a U-Haul truck after they were evicted from their campaign office. That is not a joke. That's really happened. And the Democrat won. And the Democrat won by big numbers. Even though the Republican who's replacing a conservative Democrat, even though the Republican got 5,000 more votes than the incumbent got in the last election, it didn't matter because the turnout was just too high, right? Democrats were turning out at probably 75 to 80% of a presidential year. Republicans were probably turning out at 60 to 65%. Independents were at 40, 45%. In the New York City mayoral election, and I'm going to talk to Zachary Donnini later about this because he covered the mayoral election pretty intensely. The most fascinating and interesting thing that you are going to maybe not hear, you should hear, is that in the Democratic primary, Governor Cuomo won the support of Hispanics in the Bronx and Blacks, primarily, right? Asians, a lot of whites, they voted against him. In this election, according to the New York Times, majority white areas voted overwhelmingly for Cuomo, and majority East Asian areas voted overwhelmingly for Cuomo. You know who didn't? Blacks and Hispanics. The same people that they thought were going to be the last ones in his coalition completely abandoned him. They voted entirely for the person with the D at the end of their name because they are Democrats. Had Cuomo received the amount of support in the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn in the Black and Hispanic areas that he won in the Democratic primary, if he had those percentages, he would be mayor right now and not Zohran Mamdani. That base leaving him, and even though he got larger amounts of, basically the old Bloomberg coalition, speaks to why he lost. And Curtis Lewa embarrassed himself, and I'm so ashamed of him. He should never show his face in public again. What a complete loser. Anyway, that's my initial thoughts. But we're going to hear a lot in the next coming weeks and days. Democrats and the media are going to sit there and spin this and sit there and say, this is a complete reflection of Donald Trump. This is a rejection of all things MAGA. This is a rejection of everything that 2024 was about. This is the realignment of young people and Hispanics. Two things on that. The Hispanic numbers, we're going to wait and see. We're going to find out what the actual turnout was in places like New Jersey. I looked at one city ahead of this podcast, and that was Passaic, New Jersey. Very Hispanic. In 2017 and in 2021, the Hispanic vote was D plus 54 and then D plus 38. In the presidential elections in 2016 and 2020, it was D plus 51 and then D plus 25. You could see the trajectory towards Republicans. And then in 2024, it was R plus 7. Trump won it by 7 points. And this year was D plus 24. Now, that is a massive 30-point swing towards the Democrats. However, it is still to the right of where they were in 2021 by 14 points. I think those comparisons are going to be very useful because despite a wave election, let's see if the new coalition that Trump built of voters is back to where they were before Trump ran in 2024. I doubt that they are. I don't know if they are. But what I want to say to the bigger idea of the last night was there were a couple of bright spots for Republicans. Nassau County Republicans picked up an important school board in Loudoun County, Virginia. There was a handful of things here and there. For the most part, though, it was horrible. I think Republicans and especially Republicans in DC should have an honest moment with themselves about the state of the economy. The economy is not good. We cannot lie and just say it's great because Trump's president. It is not good. For young people especially, it's not good. There's a lot of anxiety right now over AI, over the changing in the job market, over whether people can afford to live. There is a housing crisis in this country, in large part because of immigration. Just saying it like it's saying it. There is the immigration that the Bush and Reagan coalition supported in this country for decades, brought in the people like Zora Mandani, brought in his family, brought in the families of people who believe in socialism that were elected across the country last night in places like St. Paul, almost in Minneapolis, but we'll see if that election holds out later on. But in all these elections, the far left, a lot of them were bolstered by the mass immigration of the third world in our country who fundamentally believe in socialism. And I think that Republicans need to have a moment and a reflection over what the economy looks like right now, what the state of immigration has done to us in our country, and really make an important pivot. At the same time, it was a wave year, right? It was a wave year in overwhelmingly blue states. Don't set your hair on fire. I always say to candidates, if you lose by one vote, you should spend the entire next 6 months thinking about how you didn't campaign hard enough. If you lose by 1 million votes, it wasn't about you. And for a lot of these Republicans, it wasn't about them. There was nothing that they could have done to win. Just like there was a lot of Democrats, there was nothing they could have done to win in 2010 or in 2014. Just like for a lot of Republicans, nothing they could have done to win in 2006 or 2008. Wave years are wave years for a reason. And I think the most interesting thing that we are seeing is if you go through our trajectory, 2025 being a wave year, 2024 being basically a wave year, 2022 not being a wave year. That was the one exception. But 2020 being a wave, 2018 being a wave, 2016 being a wave, 2014 being a wave. The American public for the last decade is overwhelmingly frustrated with how things are working out. And they are just going to the next shiny object who can sit there and make the economy work for them, make the economy work for their kids. And we'll see how this all shakes out. But I don't think that it's that bad because you cannot control for a wave. And if you ran for office last night and you lost, I know that that's bruising, but just know it was probably nothing that you could do. It was probably the year that it was in. And Republicans have a year to make some serious changes in order to avoid a catastrophe in the midterms. With me coming up next is my friend Zachary Donnini. He's going to go over the data from New York City and show us if there's any lessons that we can learn for the nation as a whole from Mandani's win. That's coming up next. With me on today's episode is data scientist, one of my favorite people on Twitter, Zachary Donnini. Thank you for being here. So, Zach, your coverage of the New York mayor's race was better than almost anybody else's on social media.
Thank you.
What surprised you? Because you said for a while he was definitely winning. He was winning a majority. What, if anything, surprised you?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that surprised me was that the Republicans really, really, really rallied around Cuomo, right? I think Curtis Sliwa is going to end up with about 7% of the vote. In polling, he was at 15 or 16 for a while. The Trump endorsement, I think, of Cuomo definitely helped, right? Because I think Sliwa was at 10 or 11 in the early vote and then fell down. He was at maybe, I think, 6 or 5.5 in the election day vote. So the Trump endorsement helped a lot. But yeah, even in that early vote, I think, a lot of Republicans had the thought process that they liked Sliwa more than Cuomo. They answered in polling. They were going to support Sliwa. And then they came out, probably held their nose and voted for Cuomo.
Yeah, I can tell you anecdotally as a New Yorker my whole life, I know probably 7 Republicans that stayed with Sliwa. But they had made their
Yeah,
decision a long time ago, and they probably
yeah,
told the folks they were voting for Sliwa, but they were voting for Cuomo. Um, what surprised me is that a lot of people, a lot of people online especially said Cuomo needs these Bronx Hispanics,
yeah, yeah,
blacks from outer boroughs to go vote. And in the end, he lost them. He lost the establishment Democrat voter to
absolutely.
Mandani. Had he had those voters, he would have beaten Mandani.
Yeah. If he did how he did with black voters and Dominican voters in the primary, I think yeah, he would have been really close with Mamdani.
It would have been
Yeah,
especially close
yeah,
because in the and in southern Brooklyn, right? It was in
yeah, yeah,
Queens,
yeah,
Brooklyn, and the Bronx where his numbers fell apart, and
yeah,
it was almost like the Bloomberg coalition very much because he did far better in Manhattan than I thought he was going
yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah,
His
absolutely.
numbers in Manhattan were very strong.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that what their lesson is for as a political consultant, what my
yeah.
lesson is that these types of voters will always vote for the establishment
Oh yeah,
Democrat,
yeah,
even when you are, even they'll vote for the Democrat,
yeah,
even
yeah.
when you have a socialist, maybe far
PSA
left than
aligned. Yeah,
socialist.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I think that the D next to Mamdani's name, right? That first column is really really valuable with black voters in New York City and across the country, right? Right. I mean, Cuomo was the establishment D in the primary. Black voters broke for Cuomo. Then Mamdani won the primary, got the D next to his name for the general election, and yeah, I think black voters really basically kind of respected that and backed their nominee. What this reminds me of is oftentimes you get these elections where you maybe have a special election and then you have a rematch in a general election. And what often happens is the person who wins this special election will win the general election by much, much more, maybe something like 5 or 6 months later. Because just being that incumbent, winning the first time, getting the D next to the name, the Democratic establishment voters who maybe vote a little bit less based on ideology and more on party loyalty respect that.
right. And also, what it tells me from a national point is that if AOC runs for president, which who knows if she's going to, but let's say she does,
Yeah.
it's the black vote in South Carolina and the Deep South and Super Tuesday states that will stop her, right? That will not support her, very likely. Um,
I
uh,
think that would be her weakest demographic.
right, but they will then turn around and support her overwhelmingly in
Yeah.
a general
Yeah.
election. There's very little light on it. Going into, and also by the way, one other thing, the Asian vote voted for
Yeah.
Cuomo
Yeah.
after backing Mandani
I saw that.
overwhelmingly.
So Mamdani did really well in South Asian areas, but East Asian areas like Flushing and then in Southwest Brooklyn were Cuomo won, and those were areas Cuomo flipped from the primary. And Mamdani did well with the East Asian voters that are still in the Democratic coalition. I think Nate Cohn had a really nice analysis about how the vast majority of voters in that June primary were Harris voters, not Trump voters. But when you
Right.
added Trump voting Asians to the mix, which those areas shifted as hard right as almost anywhere in the country last November, Cuomo kept those voters.
I think that when you extrapolate from, I know you focus primarily on New York. When you look at New Jersey and Virginia and other races throughout most of the country, I mean, Democrats had a great night. Uh, I think that it's part of. I think that part of what Mandani's wave was just the overall wave happening in the nation towards the Democrats.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and I know I know you don't give up like opinion about this, but what was your if you look at the Latino vote specifically, which was a lot of focus on it, they definitely shifted left. But in
Yeah.
some parts, especially in New Jersey, where it's been looked at, they did not shift as left as they had for pre 2020. So
Yes.
they were not back to pre 2020 numbers. Is that an accurate statement to say?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. So again, I'm getting my hands on a lot of precinct data today. I think I'm going to be able to dive into it tonight and tomorrow and publish more, thought out analyses. But from the anecdotal stuff I've been seeing online, yeah, we're talking about 30-point swings to the left towards Democrats from 2024. It looks like in a lot of North Jersey Hispanic areas. But a lot of those areas, especially Dominican ones, were 40 or 50 point swings to the right. So that's I think going to be the big question heading forward in national politics. Is Trump proved that there is a Republican candidate who can really, really compete, and generally, I would say narrowly lose Hispanic voters in a place like North Jersey and win them in Texas. And it looks, and there's going to be down ballot lag. They're going to stick with the Democratic Party in some elections, but come 2028, I have no idea what North Jersey Hispanics will look like in the presidential election. So,
How much does the youth turnout matter for the mayoral election for Mandani? I mean, obviously, it was big. Something you tracked a big portion of it. And is it just that his message and his social media presence, which is very, very important, his
yeah.
social media was so exciting rather than the fact that they're all socialists now?
Yeah, I think first of all, we're talking about 18 to 49-year-old voters in New York City are probably substantially more socialist than the country as a whole. This isn't anything new, right? The DSA has been extremely strong in New York. They have a lot of boots on the ground. I think it's one of the cities where they're strongest in the U.S. But anecdotally and through polling, I can also tell you that a lot of the youth were coming out for Mamdani against Cuomo, right? I think people see Cuomo with the scandals, the sexual harassment issues as a Democratic Party that they don't like, and Mamdani is a fresh face with a great social media presence. Who I also think a lot of Democrats are talking about the lessons they can learn from his campaign, and yeah, one of those is the youth turnout was pretty striking, and Mamdani really transformed the electorate in a way I don't think we've seen candidates do other than Donald Trump in the last 10 years.
What lesson is there for Republicans and all that,
What lesson
and
is there?
establishing
Yeah,
Democrats?
yeah, and so I think there's going to be a lot of discussion. Is Mamdani strong? Is he weak? And I think this election last night does not give us a good data point on that. And my argument for why is that if Bernie Sanders ran against Joe Manchin nationally with a D next to his name or something, that's like a tough election to parse, right? Because we usually talk about Democrats versus Republicans. And in a Democrat versus Democrat general election, Cuomo's going to peel off a lot of those moderate Democrats. And that's nothing that Mamdani is doing wrong, right? Because, a progressive Democrat running against a moderate Democrat is tough because the moderate Democrat should get Republicans and Democrats. On the flip side, Mamdani had the D next to his name. And we talked about earlier about why, that's very good because you get the, establishment, Dominican and Black New Yorkers, coming home for you.
Right. Well, Zachary, where can people go to read more of your stuff and all your things and your Substack and Twitter and whatnot?
You can go to Zachary Donnini on Twitter, one word, and then my Substack is at zacharydonnini.com.
Go check him out. It's so good. He's so smart. Zachary, thank you for being on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Now it's time for the Ask Me Anything segment of this podcast. If you want to be part of the Ask Me Anything segment, email me, Ryan@numbersgamepodcast.com. That's Ryan@numbers, pluralgamepodcast.com. I love these questions. I think it makes a really good show. Our first question comes from Jason. He sits there and says, thank you, that he loves the true crime content that I did in the last episode. Thank you so much, Jason, for listening to this podcast or watching me on YouTube. Maybe I will do a whole true crime episode around the holidays when there's really not a lot of news going on and there's not a lot of data to sit there and pour over. But I really enjoy it. I love those kinds of stories. So I will definitely maybe do an episode or just a full Q&A true crime stuff in the future. Next question comes from Dave says, hey, Ryan, can you do an episode about why 90% of Black people vote for Democrats? I don't know if it's a full episode, Dave, that could do it. Look, the Black vote has been not a completely monolithic vote, but it's been fairly monolithic basically since they had the right to vote. They used to be Republican, now they're Democrat. I think that when you look at, there's a lot of things going on. There's part of it is the history of Blacks in America, which has been one of immense suffering, an immense amount of racism. And, even I, who thinks a lot of the DEI stuff is way overblown, who thinks that a lot of the reparations conversations is, deliriously stupid. You have to sit there and acknowledge how bad Blacks had it in this country. And there was genuine racism against them. And there becomes a mindset in the Black community, especially, about like, we can all do better together, and we could all kind of float together. All our ships can float together. All our ships can sink together. When the Black vote moved in 1964, I mean, it was a very coordinated by LBJ. LBJ knew when he passed the Civil Rights Act, he'd have the Blacks voting for the Democratic Party for the next 100 years. He said it, and he said it explicitly using the N-word. And I think that at this point, the reason that you're seeing some kind of transformation is a lot of the institutions in the Black community, the Black church, Black universities, that young Blacks are not as part of those institutions as they used to be. And also, they are not parents at a young age like they used to be. They're not teenage parents hardly at all anymore like they used to be. So now that there's some independence from those institutions that kept them as Democrats, I think that that is an important reason. But yeah, the institutions kept them Democrats. It was reinforced over and over again to be a good Black person was to be a Democrat, and they pulled the racism card as frequently and as often as they possibly could. So that is that's pretty much why. Maybe I'll have a guest sit there and talk about the history of it and the few exceptions to black candidates and Black and Republicans rather who did well with Black candidates. Mike Huckabee did phenomenally well with Black voters in Arkansas in 1998. I think he got 50%. I think he's the only Republican to get a majority of the Black vote in any statewide office of the last 3 decades. But I have to check on that. But that's real reason why, and that is and maybe I'll do a full thing. Maybe I'll do a full episode of Republicans who won sizable numbers of the Black vote and how they did it, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like Mike Huckabee, as I said, who didn't was Winsome Sears. She did not do it. Nominating a Black Republican does not ensure any Black votes. That is the lesson from last night and the many other times it has been tried. So thank you for listening to this podcast. I'll see you guys next Monday. Have a great weekend. Don't despair. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube or the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll talk to you guys next week.